I'm Loretta Nixon, Loretta Delby Nixon. I'm the wife of Richard Smoot Nixon, and this is how I am related to the Nixon family. I will relate the day of our marriage, which was March 31st, 1953. We were staying at the home of Nina Nixon Bowman and Harold I. Bowman the night before we were married. As we were driving to the temple to be married, Aunt Nina looked back from the front seat and said, "Loretta, you are a Nixon now." I'm not sure how well that went over with me, but apparently after 68 years now, I am not only a Dalby, but I am a Nixon. I associate with them very much. But in the marriage that we've had, we've been deeply involved in family history. And I'm going to relate when we were living in Boise, Richard was bishop of the Boise 2nd Ward. No, Boise 16th Ward. And he came home one evening from his duties as a bishop, and I said, we had received a record from Ernest Whitehead telling about William A. Nixon's family, which is the immigrant ancestor of the Nixon family. And I said, Richard, why don't you see if you can find a Johnson in Crossville, Tennessee, because in this letter that Ernest sent to us, it was of a letter from his daughter, Mary Louise Nixon, and she was living in Crossville, Tennessee, and she had married a Johnson. So we immediately went to the telephone and called, and sure enough, there was a Crady Johnson in Crossville, Tennessee, and we called her. And it turned out that she had the Nixon Bible and had a lot of the artifacts from the Nixon family. The Nixon Bible and the Nixon photo album, and the wedding dress of Mary Perrin, which was the second marriage of William A. Nixon. So I prodded, Richard was on the phone, and I poked him in the ribs and I said, ask her if we can have the Bible when she's through with it. And because she had no descendants, she had no living descendants, and so she consented to let us have the Bible. So then after this experience, we talked to Uncle Ez, who is J.W. Nixon's son. And Uncle Ez was just retiring from his business and had time to travel. So he and Aunt LaRue went back to see Crady and developed a relationship. And it turns out that when Crady was ready to close up her home, and she sent this box of artifacts to Uncle Ez, and here was the Bible, and that was to go to Loretta. And then she also sent this photo album, and the wedding dress. Sadly, the wedding dress was not marked when Aunt LaRue died, and it was thrown away. But the Bible and the photo album has survived, along with a few other artifacts. Another interesting event is that Uncle Ez was given the opportunity to buy the gold watch that belonged to William A. Nixon. And he decided it was too much. And she was asking $10 for this box. And so when we found this out, what Richard called the jeweler in Crossfield, who she had sold it to, and he had just sent the shipment of watches to New York City, so it was impossible to try and trace it down, or we would have bought it for $200 or whatever. But that was one thing that was missed. But we do have the Bible, which is probably more important than the gold watch, and the photo album, which is more important than the gold watch. But we have been able to gather information on most of William A. Nixon's descendants. As far as his ancestry is concerned, the only thing that we have of value is a letter from Mary Louise to Ernest. So this letter from Mary Louise is dated in 1936. And in it, she talks about his father dying when he was about 12 years of age. Now, some people have indicated that this father lived on, but if he died when William was 12 years of age, William, on the back of a picture that we have, said that he was born March the 24th, 1817. So 12 and 17 would be, what, about 1827 or thereabouts when his father passed away. But he also, this father was supposed to have had a manufacturing of Nixon pianos. And there is a Nixon piano in existence, but no one knows very much about where it was manufactured. I think if we could get more information on that, why we would be able to pinpoint the ancestry even for another generation or two further back. But she also talks about his two brothers. Two of them were in the band during the Crimean War for England, and there is definitely a musical talent in the Nixon family that's been passed down, which is to me very interesting that Mary Louise talks about that. So another bit of information that we have been able to gather is that William immigrated just shortly before 1850. We do have a cousin that found the immigration of his wife, Bridget, and three of the children, but we've never been able to find the actual immigration of William A. and his two sons. Maybe it'll show up in the future. But what gives us even more information is that we had the experience. During this research, I just might add that we have had the Spirit guide us into realms that we never would have thought of. One of which was trying to locate the divorce record. We knew that he had been married twice and that there was a divorce. When we were living in, we were living in Arizona at the time, and Richard was serving on the High Council of the Tempe Stake, and one of his responsibilities was family history. But one of the counselors in the presidency of the Tempe Stake was President Randall, and he was an attorney. And I had written for this divorce record in Minnesota, and I got a reply back from the clerk that yes, they were divorced, and I think it was 1852, but that was all the information. It wasn't very specific. So I asked President Randall, I said, surely there has to be more information on this divorce. And all he had to tell me was, well, you have to ask for the complaint. And so we pursued and were able to find this complaint. And the only way we were able to find it this is a long roundabout way, but Effie Dean Rich, who was helping to run Jacob Lake, was hiring young people, and one of the people she interviewed was from St. Paul, Minnesota. And so she hired her specifically in order to get information from St. Paul. And this employees, I think it was either her mother or someone she knew there, went into the courthouse in St. Paul and did find the complaint and has handwritten it. And I have that record in my records. But it gave us a lot of information about the marriage and about how when they did come to America. And I've put this in Family Search, I think, is this information on the divorce record. But it was really only through the workings of the Spirit that we were able to find this information, which was valuable concerning William A. Nixon. William had 5 children from his first wife, Bridget Deegan. Now that's another interesting thing, is that James W. Nixon leaves an autobiography. And in it he lists his family and lists his brothers and sisters from Bridget Deegan. But he gives her name as Deagnan, Deagnan. But when we found the marriage, the name was Dagnall. And we still have not been able to find if it was the Irish brogue that was written down in a certain way, and why the difference, why the discrepancy, we do not know. But we do know that Bridget, and there was about a 10 years difference in their age, that he was much younger than Bridget. But they had 5 children. And I guess I'll tell you a little bit about this research and how the Spirit has guided me in finding the descendants of William Abraham. He had a sister, Catherine Nixon, who was married twice. She was married first to a Hoff, Edward Hoff, and then she was married to Isaac Stewart. And both of these men served in the Civil War. And so I sent for the pension records, and I have these pension records of Catherine Hoff. And I've chased Catherine all over the United States. I went to Macomb, Illinois, and I didn't go to Chicago, but I've been into the Chicago records. We do know that she lived in Chicago for a short while, and that is where her second husband passed away, Isaac Stewart. But she had, by the first marriage, she had Walter Hoff, but he changed his name later to Stewart from the second marriage. Then she had, by the second marriage, he had an Ella. And Ella was married to a Patterson, who was an artist in Chicago. But he died quite young. And so that's where according to the pension records, I knew that Kate had died, that she went by Kate, had died in 1906. But then I lost her. It was just a brick wall. Well, just a few years ago, because of the wonders of genealogy and the internet and all, we find that Ella moved to Seattle, Washington, and is buried in Seattle, Washington, not in Chicago, Illinois. And she married, her daughter Ella married a prominent attorney by the name of Hershmer Johnston. That's with a T-O-N. And Hershmer Johnston and Ella had 3 children. One of the children was a son, Harvey, and this is what is kind of interesting because of the merchant genes that go through the family, as well as the musical talent. Why, Harvey starts as a stock boy with Bon Marché, which is equivalent to Macy's or ZCMI, a very large mercantile store. He works his way up to being a vice president of the company, as well as subsidiary of the Bon Marché. And so I found Harvey, and of course he was deceased, but he had 2 children, and I knew that possibility that they could still be living. And I was able to trace his son, Stuart C. Johnston, and when I found him in Indian Wells, California, I knew it had to be him, but I didn't have an address. I mean, I didn't have a phone number. I didn't have an email. All I had was an address, a possible address, so I wrote to him. And sure enough, it was the son of and grandson of this Ella Patterson Johnston. But sadly enough, he claims he didn't have a lot. What I was seeking was trying to find a picture of Kate, J.W. Nixon's and William Nixon's daughter, Kate Stewart. And he said that his family has been dysfunctional, was his words, and that he didn't have a whole lot. Well, it turns out he had a sister, and I pursued it and found this sister living in Mercer Island, and I called her. And this is one of the sad things about doing research when you get hit a dead end like this. But anyway, I talked to this sister, and she says, yes, I have Isaac's picture under my bed. And she had inherited all of Ella's material. And so I'm sure she has pictures of Kate and Ella and the whole thing, but she refuses to share them. So I hit a dead end. But at least I have found living descendants of Kate.
Can I ask you, is she still alive?
She's still alive. And I told her, I said, I have a brother who lives in Anacortes. If I were to come, no, I do not. I won't share it. It's private. So I don't know how pictures of a person that was born before the turn of the century is private, but
do you have things you could share with her that you could offer?
She's just very adamant that and I contacted her son previous to that, and he said yes, this is his line. But when I wrote and told him about what she had told me, he wouldn't answer me either. So it's a dead end as far as Kate's concerned. But I have good news on the other children.
Now these are the other children of
the first family, which would be James William Nixon, Kate Stewart, and then there was 2 sisters, Jenny and Matilda, and then there was a son, Billy. He went by Billy, but his name was William A. He was a junior. So
this is all of James William.
These are also all of his full brothers and sisters. Now he had brothers and sisters from the second marriage as well, but this is from the first. So we'll start with Billy. Billy was a merchant. Only he moved to Farmington, Minnesota. He also was in the newspaper business. He owned a newspaper, and we contacted. How I contacted his living descendant was I knew that he had 3 children. There was Arthur and Guy and Rilla, and I found Guy's death certificate in California, and the death certificate gave the informant as Dorothy Lundberg in Anoka, Minnesota. So I went to the phone book and found Dorothy Lundberg in Anoka, and I called her, and I talked to her about Billy and his wife Delia, and that Delia had married a Cooksey. And when I told her about Cooksey, she said, "I knew you were for real." You know, sometimes when you get a phone call, you wonder if you're talking to someone that's trying to scam you. And she said, "But I knew you were for real." And so she invited us to come back to Anoka. And so Richard and I made a trip and spent 3 or 4 days in Anoka, Minnesota. And Dorothy uh, uh, tore her whole house apart and brought out pictures and memorabilia of Billy and her mother. She didn't know too much about Billy because her mother had divorced, and no, yes, Billy had a divorce, and so Rilla didn't know too much about the father. And but it turns out that Rilla was married to a Drake, William Drake, and they had this Dorothy Lundberg. Now she was married. This is an interesting thing again about the Nixon family, is that she got involved with the Hollywood set and married a Henry Bussey. And Henry Bussey was a famous trumpet player, and he ran with the Hollywood set. Harry James and all Tommy Dorsey, Harry James, they were all in the same group. And Dorothy was married to him a short while and had one son, and they named him Henry. And then Henry has one daughter. So of Billy's descendants, he probably only has maybe at the most, I would say 3 or 4 living descendants today, as opposed to James William, who runs into the thousands, which and this is true probably also of the other siblings. Their posterity is not anything like what our great-grandfather, James William Nixon, has, which is kind of interesting. So that was my experience with Dorothy, and Richard was with me in Anoka, Minnesota. And we found the most wonderful bakery in Anoka. They had the most wonderful and divine cheesecake in Anoka, Minnesota. But we went over and talked to one of the descendants of the second marriage that lived not too far, and he brought out photo albums and talked to us. And that was on the Rathburn side. So we've had a full life in the last 68 years trying to find William A. Nixon's descendants. One other experience that we had was trying to find his youngest sister Jenny's family, and somehow, and I can't right off remember how we were able to contact Rhea Howell, and Rhea Howell was a descendant of Jenny, and we went to see her. And she was living in Coarsegold, California at the time, and she pulled out all of this memorabilia from her collection of the family. Fortunately, these people did not dump it in dumpsters, that it has been preserved. And so I was able to photograph a lot of the pictures and memorabilia of these siblings of James William Nixon. So I'm trying to think. And then the other sister, Matilda, was married to a Gregory, and here we were led to a man by the name of Leslie Rogers, who was living in Novato, California, and he is now deceased. And he brought out the Gregory Bible and the pictures of the Gregory descendants. And that was an interesting experience as well. But unfortunately, he was fairly young and has now since passed away, so I don't know what has happened to those collections. but we do have them on photograph, and we're trying to get them into family search. Okay, William A. Nixon's second family, he was married to Mary Elizabeth Perrin, and they had two daughters and three sons. There was Mary Louise, who I've talked about previously, who wrote the letter to Ernest Whitehead. And then there was Agnes Nixon, who was married to a Dr. Rathburn. And then there were three sons, Clarence and Frederick, and Clarence, Frederick, and Henry. And Clarence and Henry had no descendants. And the Rathburns, there was just a few descendants on the Rathburn family. And in fact, speaking of the Rathburns, when Aunt LaRue and Uncle Ez went back east, they did go to St. Cloud, where William Abraham moved to after he left St. Paul, and found Nellie Rathburn, who was a wife of Dr. Rathburn. And they did gather quite a bit of information on the Rathburn family.